When I was 10, my dad was arrested for a crime that never made sense. They said he attacked someone in a parking lot, left them bleeding. I was with him that evening. We had just picked up tacos and were driving home. He stopped to help a guy who had collapsed by a dumpster. That's all I remember before flashing lights and cops yelling at him to get on the ground. Mom didn't cry when he was taken. In fact, she barely blinked. And 2 months later, she introduced us to Uncle Jared, a man who smelled like burnt cologne and always smiled with his mouth but never his eyes. "This is who will take care of us now," she said. At first I didn't question it. I was a kid. I was scared. I didn't know what else to do. But then Jared started touching my shoulder. Too long. Commenting on my body. And Mom, she told me I was being dramatic, that Jared was trying his best. The only person who seemed to listen was Dad, and he was calling me collect from prison. I wasn't supposed to answer. Mom said if I picked up again, she'd throw my phone in the river. So I bought a used iPod Touch from a neighbor, one with Wi-Fi. Hid it under my bed and used it only when she and Jared were asleep. I emailed Dad, sometimes short updates, sometimes long sobbing paragraphs that made no sense. He always replied, always believed me. And then one day, after another silent dinner where Jared stared holes into my chest and Mom scrolled on her phone pretending not to notice, I got a message from Dad that made me stop breathing. "Go to the attic, behind the insulation on the west side." That was it. No greeting, no sign-off. But something in me knew Dad had left something behind. Something that might explain why our family shattered. Something Jared didn't want me to find. I waited until after midnight when the house had gone quiet, except for the occasional creak of wood settling and Jared's heavy snore echoing from down the hall. I slipped out of bed wearing socks to mute my footsteps and crept up the narrow stairs to the attic, flashlight in hand. The air grew colder the higher I climbed, and a musty smell hit me as I pulled down the attic ladder, the kind of smell that clung to forgotten things. I crawled in, brushing past cobwebs and boxes labeled with the names of holidays. We hadn't celebrated since Dad left. I counted the wooden beams until I reached the west side, then peeled back a flap of pink insulation, my hands trembling behind it. Wedged between two studs in the wall was a small fireproof envelope taped shut with brittle masking tape. I pulled it free. Heart hammering inside was a stack of neatly folded papers. Old photographs and something heavier at the bottom. A silver USB drive taped to the last page. I unfolded the top sheet, recognizing Dad's tight, slanted handwriting instantly. It began with a date from 2 weeks before his arrest, and then a sentence that stopped me cold. "I know Jared is not who he says he is. I've seen him following me more than once, and last Thursday I found a burner phone in your mom's purse, with messages from him talking about getting me out of the picture for good. The rest was a blur of details, names, locations, dates, things a child wouldn't fully understand, but somehow I did. I realized Dad had been suspicious for a long time, and he'd tried to document it. The drive, I figured, must have held more than he could risk keeping on paper. Maybe audio, maybe photos. I stuffed everything under my shirt just like I'd done with hidden candy bars as a kid, and backed out of the attic as quietly as I'd come. My mind spinning with what I'd just found, I barely made it back to bed before the hallway light flicked on. Footsteps heavy approaching. Jared's shadow stretched long across my open doorway, and for a terrifying moment I thought he'd somehow heard me breathing too hard. Heart pounding, but then he turned back down the hall, muttering about the bathroom. The door clicked shut, and I finally let myself exhale. I lay there clutching the envelope against my chest like a lifeline, and I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was on that drive, it could change everything, and I had to find someone I could trust before Jared realized what I had. The next morning, I woke early before the sun had even warmed the fog off the front lawn, and slipped the envelope into the bottom of my backpack beneath my textbooks and gym clothes. I knew if Jared or even Mom caught me acting strange, they'd start asking questions, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet at breakfast. Jared was unusually chipper, flipping pancakes like some sitcom dad, and humming off-key while Mom smiled sleepily in her robe. I barely touched my plate, my stomach too knotted with nerves to eat. Jared mentioned something about coming to my school. Later, to pick me up for a dentist appointment he scheduled for me without asking. I nodded, playing along, while my brain screamed that it was a trap. I walked to school instead of taking the bus, using the extra 20 minutes to duck into the community library across the street from the park. I knew they still had old desktop computers. No cameras, no logins, and most importantly, no one who paid attention to a quiet teenage girl typing in the corner. I slipped in and sat near the back, plugged the USB into the machine, and opened the first file. It was a series of dated folders labeled with names like receipts, messages, and surveillance. In the folder called Audio, I found several voice memos Dad had recorded in secret. One caught my attention right away because of the timestamp. Just 3 days before he was arrested, it was his voice low and hurried. He said, "I've been followed again." Saw Jared near the office on his lunch break when he claimed he was in another town. I think he's planning something with Lauren. Her behavior's off, too affectionate, too fake. I need to get proof before it's too late. My breath caught in my throat, hearing Dad so afraid and so certain it wasn't a theory anymore. It was real. I clicked into the folder labeled Photos and found blurry snapshots taken from a distance of Jared and Mom meeting in parking lots. Well before they'd claimed to have started dating, some showed them handing off envelopes, others showed Jared entering buildings that looked a lot like the ones near the courthouse. Something was happening, something huge and terrifying. I started copying the files to a fresh drive. I bought last week just in case, but before I finished, the library door creaked open and a shadow passed near my desk. I didn't turn, but I knew instinctively it wasn't just a random visitor. Something about the air changed. I yanked the drive out, shoved it in my pocket, and logged out, then turned to see Mr. Bentley, the school resource officer, standing a few feet away looking surprised to see me. He asked what I was doing there, and I lied easily, saying I was researching for a civics project. He smiled thinly and said, Jared had called the school, asking where I was because he'd stopped by and couldn't find me. My throat went dry. I mumbled something about heading back now and left before he could press further. I walked fast, heart hammering, and when I reached the school, I slipped through the side door and made it to class just before the bell. I spent the next hour staring at my textbook, seeing nothing and thinking only this. Jared knows I'm hiding something and I have less time than I thought. By the time the final bell rang, I had a plan, but it hinged on making it through the afternoon without raising suspicion. When I walked out of the school building, Jared's SUV was already parked by the curb, engine idling, windows down. His sunglasses reflected the cloudless sky, so I couldn't see his eyes, but I felt them on me as I approached. He smiled too, wide, said, "Hey kiddo, how was your day?" And I forced a smile back, muttering something about a math quiz. We drove in silence most of the way until he started talking about dinner plans, grilling steaks, maybe renting a movie, just the three of us, like a family. I nodded even though my pulse was pounding because I knew I wasn't going home with him. Not really. I had texted Danny during last period, asking if I could crash at her place. Said it was urgent, she didn't ask questions, just sent me her address and said her mom wouldn't mind. I told Jared I needed to stop by the library again to grab a book for extra credit and promised it would only take a minute. He offered to come in with me, but I said I needed to talk to my teacher, who was helping with the project. Reluctantly, he agreed to wait outside. But as soon as I got through the door, I bolted out the back exit and sprinted across 2 blocks until I reached Danny's house. When she opened the door, I burst into tears, not because I was sad, but because I was finally somewhere safe. I told her everything, not every detail, but enough to make her eyes go wide and her jaw clench. She didn't try to tell me I was imagining things or that maybe I misunderstood, like so many others had. Instead, she pulled me into the kitchen, handed me a bottle of water, and said, "We're figuring this out together." That night, after her mom went to bed, we huddled around her laptop reviewing the files I had copied. Danny was good with tech, better than I realized. She found metadata in the photos proving the timestamps matched the dates Dad had mentioned in his journal. She even traced an address Jared had visited repeatedly, back to a property owned by a shell corporation registered just months before Dad's arrest. We didn't know exactly what it meant yet, but it was clearly shady, clearly intentional, and clearly connected to something far bigger than we'd thought. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound made me jump. Every car passing the house had me peeking through the curtains. By morning, we had printed summaries of everything and made copies of the USB drive to hide in different spots. I kept one in my shoe taped beneath the insole, just in case I had to run again, because deep down I knew Jared wouldn't stop, not until he got back whatever he thought I had, and that meant I had to act first before he did. At school the next day, I kept my head down, stuck to Danny like glue, and avoided every security camera and corner where Jared might be lurking, I told the principal. I needed to speak to the counselor about a personal matter and was granted a hall pass during lunch, which I used to sneak into the computer lab and draft an anonymous tip for the state investigator's office attaching redacted versions of the files and explaining the situation as carefully as I could. I didn't use names, not yet, just enough to make it clear that someone innocent had gone to prison and someone dangerous was walking free. I sent the email from a burner account, then deleted every trace of it from the school system and cleared the browser history twice. I felt like a spy in some cheap thriller, except this was real. And if I slipped even once, it could all fall apart. When I got back to class, my phone buzzed with a single message from Danny. She had spoken to her older brother who was in college studying criminal justice, and he wanted to help too. He had friends in law enforcement, not the local kind, but people who could get things moving discreetly if we needed, he said. It was all about building a chain of credibility. The more people who could vouch for my story and the files, the harder it would be for Jared to sweep it under the rug or worse, spin it as some delusion from a confused teen. I felt hope flicker in my chest for the first time in weeks. Not because I thought it would be easy, but because I wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference after school. Danny and I stopped by the library to scan more pages from Dad's journal. She had brought her portable scanner, and we worked fast, whispering to each other as we flipped through entries. Some of them made me cry. Others made me furious. The journal wasn't just a record of suspicion. It was a timeline of betrayal, of a man watching his life unravel, while powerless to stop it. By the time we finished, my hands were shaking from adrenaline. We walked out, into the fading sunlight, just as Danny's brother pulled up in his rusted sedan. He looked serious but kind, and after introducing himself, he said we needed to sit down and plan our next move, because things were about to get a whole lot more complicated. We sat in the back booth of a quiet diner 3 towns over, the kind with peeling red leather seats and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years, while Danny's brother Josh laid out the plan, in a calm voice that made everything sound almost normal first. He said we had to make multiple secure copies of everything we had, physical and digital, and keep them in separate places. One for me, one for him, one with a trusted adult outside the immediate circle. He suggested using a family lawyer if we had one, or even a school counselor, if they were trustworthy. I told him about Mrs. Calder, the librarian who used to read me fairy tales when I was 6, and let me hide in the stacks when the world felt too loud. Josh nodded and said that would work as a contingency. Second, we needed to verify the authenticity of the documents with someone neutral, someone with credentials who could testify that they weren't forged or altered. Danny mentioned her debate coach, whose wife was a forensic document examiner, and Josh's eyes lit up like that was the luckiest break we'd had all week. Third, he said we needed to prepare for the fallout because once this went public, things would move fast, and not everyone would believe us. People might think I was making it up, that I was just a bitter kid lashing out against a new stepdad. I told him I didn't care what they thought, as long as Dad came home, but inside I felt the familiar coil of fear twist tight in my chest. What if it wasn't enough? What if Jared got ahead of us and painted me as unstable, like he almost did with Mom the night she left bruises blooming like flowers across her jaw and collarbone? Josh handed me a flash drive with encryption software, already loaded, told me to store it in the lining of my backpack and act like nothing was different. I nodded, clutching the small device like it was a lifeline, because in a way it was. We left the diner with our hearts pounding and our backpacks heavier than before. Not just with files and flash drives, but with the weight of what we were about to do expose the truth no matter the cost. When I got home that evening, the house was dark, except for the flickering blue glow of the television. Jared was slouched on the couch, a beer in one hand, the other lazily flipping channels without really watching anything. He glanced up when I walked in, his eyes narrowing slightly, but he said nothing, just raised his bottle in a mock salute and turned his attention back to the screen. I walked past him, holding my breath until I reached my room, then quietly shut the door behind me and locked it. I sat on the edge of my bed, fingers trembling as I reached into my backpack and pulled out the envelope with the notarized statements, the email printouts, the copy of the voicemail Dad had managed to leave before the police took his phone. Everything Josh and I had compiled. It was all there, solid, real, undeniable, and I knew that tomorrow morning everything would change. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound in the house seemed louder than usual. the wind through the trees, the creak of floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator at one point. I thought I heard footsteps outside my door, pausing briefly before retreating, and I lay there in the dark, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. When the sun finally rose, I dressed quickly and tucked the flash drive into my shoe just in case I made my way to school early. Before the building officially opened, Mrs. Calder was already there unlocking the library doors with her usual gentle smile. She looked surprised to see me, but when I asked if we could talk privately, she led me to the small reading nook in the back, surrounded by shelves of worn classics and beanbags that smelled faintly of vanilla. I handed her the envelope and started explaining, my voice shaking at first, but gaining strength as I recounted everything. She listened without interrupting, her expression grave but calm. And when I was done, she reached out and took my hand, telling me I was incredibly brave and that she would help however she could. She locked the envelope in her desk drawer and said she'd contact someone she trusted in the district to start the process of submitting the evidence officially. I felt a wave of cautious relief begin to wash over me for the first time in months. I wasn't carrying the full weight of it alone. She called in the school counselor, Mr. Denton, a soft-spoken man with kind eyes, who immediately took me to his office after Mrs. Calder explained the situation. He asked me to tell him everything again, and I did from the beginning all the way to the night before. When I sat in my room knowing Jared was just outside the door, he took notes carefully occasionally, nodding and asking questions for clarity. Then he said they would contact Child Protective Services and the police, but that for my safety, I shouldn't go home that night. I felt a cold chill wash over me at the idea of never walking through that front door again. But I also knew deep down it was the right move. Mr. Denton called my mom under the pretense of discussing my grades and asked her to come to the school. She arrived 20 minutes later wearing her usual business-casual smile that faltered slightly when she saw me sitting beside him. When he started explaining what had happened, her face went blank, then pinched with disbelief, and then quickly turned to defensive, scoffing at the idea that Jared would ever hurt me, calling the whole thing an overreaction, saying I must have been manipulated by my father, who she claimed was jealous and resentful and trying to ruin her new life. But then Mr. Denton calmly placed the envelope on the table and slid it toward her, watching her face as she opened it and started reading page after page. And with each line, her expression shifted from denial to confusion to a slow, crumbling realization. She didn't say anything for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was small, barely a whisper. She asked if it was true, if Jared really said those things, if Dad had proof, and I just nodded because we both knew what she was really asking, and she burst into tears. Right there, her body shaking as she clutched the pages to her chest. The counselor asked if she had anywhere to stay, and she nodded mutely, saying she'd go to her sister's place, out in Westvale. That she needed time to think, and then she left the room without another word, just gathered her purse and walked away. I didn't see her again for a week. During that week, I stayed with a temporary foster family. While the authorities continued gathering evidence, they arranged a supervised interview with my dad, who showed the officers every email, every screenshot, and every photo of Jared's manipulation, the backup camera footage, the text messages where Jared threatened me, even some old recordings from before the separation where Jared had made suggestive comments while Dad had been recording an argument with Mom. Everything began falling into place fast, and the truth became impossible to ignore. Jared was arrested 3 days later after investigators found additional illegal material on his laptop when they raided the apartment. It was everything Dad feared and worse. And suddenly Mom's silence made sense. She hadn't just been manipulated by Jared. She'd been enabling him, blind to what he really was. Perhaps because admitting it would mean admitting how badly she'd failed to protect me. When she finally reached out to me, it was through a social worker. She wrote a letter, not long, but filled with apologies that didn't feel like enough. She said she didn't know how she could face me, that she should have listened, that she hated herself for letting Jared anywhere near me. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. She just wanted me to know that she was trying to fix what she could. I read the letter once, folded it carefully, and tucked it into my journal. I wasn't ready to respond. Maybe I wouldn't be for a long time, maybe never. But I didn't want to throw it away either, because as much as I hated what she'd done, I couldn't stop remembering the version of her that used to tuck me in at night, the one who sang softly when she brushed my hair and told me I'd change the world one day. That version of her felt like a ghost now, but I still held on to that memory, because sometimes remembering who someone used to be is the only way to survive the person they became. Even now, whenever I walk past that old payphone outside Fairview High, I remember the version of myself who stood there with trembling fingers and a breaking heart begging for help. I used to think I was weak for needing someone to save me, but now I know different. I wasn't weak. I was surviving. I was fighting in the only way I knew how. The truth is, sometimes survival doesn't look heroic. It looks like hiding letters in library books and pretending to laugh at your abuser's jokes. It looks like forcing yourself to eat dinner next to a man who makes your skin crawl because the alternative is worse. But what I've learned, what I know now, is that silence is what people like Vincent thrive on. And the moment you take back your voice, the moment you say, "No more," everything changes. I'm 18 now. I'm in college studying forensic psychology. I want to understand how people like Vincent think, how they manipulate, how they convince the world there's something they're not. I want to be the voice for kids who can't speak up yet. For every Ava who was told she was crazy, dramatic, or lying. For every kid who was told their fear was imagination. My dad is doing better. He works at a community workshop for veterans now, helping them find meaning in crafts and community and rebuilding. He still flinches at loud sounds, sometimes still double checks locks, but he laughs more now, real deep laughs that make his shoulders shake. As for my mom, we still don't talk. I get letters, apologies written in shaky handwriting, each more desperate than the last. She says she's in therapy, that she's trying to forgive herself. Maybe one day I'll be ready to read those letters. Maybe. But for now, I'm focused on healing. The house where it all happened is gone. We sold it last year. Too many ghosts in those walls. Dad and I live in a small apartment now with mismatched furniture and a balcony that overlooks a dog park. It's not perfect, but it's peaceful. We sit out there on weekends watching the dogs chase each other in chaotic circles, and for the first time in a long time, I feel okay. I think about Vincent sometimes, about how close he came to taking everything from us, about how many people like him still walk free because they know how to hide behind smiles and lies. But he didn't win, not in the end, because even in the darkest moments when I was scared and alone, when it felt like no one believed me, I kept one thing: hope. Hope that the truth would matter, that justice would come, that I could still build a life from the wreckage, and I did. If you're reading this and you feel like no one sees you, like your voice has been stolen, know this. You are not alone. Keep writing, keep speaking, keep surviving, because your story matters. The truth matters. And one day your voice will be the thing that sets you free.